The sound of laughter still rang in Clara Bennett's ears as she stormed away from the stockyard office, her cheeks burning despite the cool Montana morning air of September 1884. She had walked into that building with her head held high, determined to register her own cattle brand, only to be met with mockery from every man present. The clerk had actually wiped tears from his eyes as he told her that branding was men's work, that a woman had no business trying to manage cattle, and that she should go back to her kitchen where she belonged. The other ranchers waiting in line had joined in, their cruel comments following her out the door like a pack of hungry wolves. Clara's father had left her 200 acres of decent grazing land when he died 6 months ago, along with 30 head of cattle that bore his brand, the Circle B. But those cattle were getting older, and she had been saving every penny to purchase younger stock that could build her herd into something sustainable. The problem was that she could not legally claim those new cattle as her own without her own registered brand. Her father's brand had reverted to her uncle upon his death, as was the legal custom, and her uncle had made it clear he had no intention of sharing it with a woman he considered incapable of ranching. She made her way down the dusty main street of Prescott, Montana, past the general store and the saloon, past the hotel where travelers stopped on their way to somewhere more important. The town sat nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills that turned golden in the autumn sun, with the mountains rising in the distance like sentinels. It was beautiful country, the kind of place her father had loved, and she was not about to let anyone drive her away from it. The sound of hooves on packed earth made her look up. A tall man on a bay horse was riding toward her, and even from a distance she could see the easy way he sat in the saddle, like he and the horse were one creature. He wore a dusty brown hat, pulled low against the sun, and his shirt was faded blue, the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. As he drew closer, she noticed his face was weathered but handsome, with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with quiet observation. He tipped his hat to her as he passed, and she nodded back, her mind still churning with anger and frustration. She barely registered his existence as she continued toward the boarding house where she had been staying overnight, unable to face the long ride back to her ranch until she had calmed down enough to think straight. The boarding house was run by Mrs. Henderson, a widow who had known Clara's father and who treated Clara with the kind of maternal concern that made her heart ache for what she had lost. Mrs. Henderson took one look at her face and ushered her into the kitchen, pressing a cup of coffee into her hands. "They laughed at me," Clara said, and then the whole story came pouring out. "Mrs." Henderson listened with a deepening frown, shaking her head at the behavior of the men in town. "There is a cowboy staying here," Mrs. Henderson said slowly when Clara had finished. "He came in yesterday looking for work. His name is James Cordell, and he has been working ranches from Texas to Wyoming for the past 10 years. He seems like a decent sort, not like those fools at the stockyard. Maybe you should talk to him about your situation." Clara wanted to refuse. She had been let down by enough men for one day. But something in Mrs. Henderson's expression made her pause. The older woman had good instincts about people, and if she thought this James Cordell might be different, perhaps it was worth a conversation. "He is out back fixing the fence," Mrs. Henderson said. "I will introduce you." They found him in the small yard behind the boarding house, his hat hanging on a fence post, while he hammered a new rail into place. This close, Clara could see he was probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and those same observant eyes she had noticed earlier. He was the man who had tipped his hat to her on the street. "Mr. Cordell," Mrs. Henderson called. "I would like you to meet Miss Clara Bennett. She owns a ranch outside of town." James straightened up, wiping his hands on his trousers before extending one to Clara. His grip was firm, but not crushing, and his eyes met hers directly without the condescension she had grown so tired of seeing in men's faces. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Bennett," he said. His voice was low and steady, with the hint of a southern accent that spoke of origins far from Montana. "Mrs. Henderson tells me you are looking for work," Clara said, deciding to be direct. She had no time for games or false politeness. "That is correct," James replied. "I have been moving north with the seasons, but I am thinking it might be time to settle somewhere for a while. Montana seems like good country." "Can you brand cattle?" Clara asked bluntly. James's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "I have been branding cattle since I was 12 years old. Learned from my father down in Texas before the war changed everything." "I need someone who can teach me," Clara said, watching his face carefully for any sign of mockery. "I want to brand my own cattle, register my own mark, but I do not know how, and every man in this town thinks I am a fool for trying." For a long moment, James said nothing. He studied her face with those dark eyes, and Clara felt like he was measuring something about her, weighing her sincerity and determination against the absurdity of what she was proposing. "Why do you want to do it yourself?" he asked finally. "You could hire a man to do the branding for you." "Because it is my land, my cattle, my future," Clara said fiercely. "I will not build my life on the labor of others without understanding every part of the work myself. If I'm going to be a rancher, I need to know how to do everything a rancher does." Something shifted in James's expression. The wariness faded, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "Most people would not think that way," he said. "Most would be content to give orders and stay clean." "I am not most people," Clara replied. James picked up his hat and settled it back on his head. "I will teach you," he said, "and I will respect whatever brand you choose to make your mark, but I warn you, it is hard work and it will not be pleasant. Cattle do not like being branded, and the whole process takes strength and skill." "I can work hard," Clara said, "and I can learn." "Then I will ride out to your ranch tomorrow morning," James said. "We can discuss terms of employment and get started." Clara felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she had been carrying since the morning's humiliation. Here was someone who was not laughing at her, who was willing to take her seriously. It felt like the first real hope she had experienced in months. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You do not know what this means to me." "I think I might," James said, and there was something in his tone that made her wonder what experiences had shaped his willingness to help her when others would not. That night, Clara lay awake in her room at the boarding house, listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep. Tomorrow, she would ride back to her ranch, and the day after that, James Cordell would arrive to begin teaching her. She had no idea if she would actually be capable of the work, but she was going to try with everything she had. Her father had believed she could do anything she set her mind to, and she was not about to prove him wrong now that he was gone. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on the grass. Clara settled her bill with Mrs. Henderson, who packed her a lunch for the ride home, and wished her luck with barely concealed excitement. The older woman clearly approved of the plan, and that approval warmed Clara more than she wanted to admit. The ride back to her ranch took most of the morning. The property sat about 8 miles outside of Prescott, nestled against the foothills where a creek ran year-round, providing water for the cattle and the small vegetable garden Clara had been struggling to maintain. The house was modest, just 3 rooms with a stone fireplace and a covered porch. But her father had built it with his own hands, and every board and nail represented his dreams for their future. She spent the afternoon preparing for James's arrival, cleaning out the small bunkhouse where her father's occasional hired hands had stayed, making sure there was firewood stacked and the roof was not leaking. The work kept her hands busy, but her mind kept drifting to the cowboy who had agreed to help her. There was something about him that intrigued her, a quietness that suggested depths she could not yet fathom. James arrived mid-morning the next day, riding the same bay horse and leading a pack horse loaded with his belongings. Clara watched from the porch as he approached, taking in the way he surveyed the property with a practiced eye. She wondered what he saw, whether her ranch measured up to the standards of the places he had worked before. "Nice setup," he said as he dismounted. "Good water, decent grazing, shelter from the worst of the wind. Your father knew what he was doing when he chose this spot." "He did," Clara agreed. "He had a good eye for land." James nodded toward the small herd of cattle grazing in the distance. "Those are the ones with your father's brand?" "Yes," Clara said. 30 head, all bearing the Circle B. But that brand belongs to my uncle now, and he will not let me use it. So any new cattle I acquire need a different mark." "Have you thought about what you want your brand to look like?" James asked. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of paper on which she had been sketching ideas for weeks. She handed it to James, feeling suddenly vulnerable, as if she were exposing something deeply personal. The design she had settled on was simple but distinctive, a letter C with a small star at the top right corner, the whole thing enclosed in a circle. James studied it carefully, turning the paper to examine it from different angles. "The star C," he said finally. "It is a good brand, clean lines, easy to read, hard to alter. You have given this real thought. I wanted something that was mine, Clara said. "Something that represented me, but also paid respect to my father's Circle B. The circle keeps that connection alive." James looked up from the paper, and their eyes met. "I can see that," he said. "It is a mark worth respecting." Those words, simple as they were, meant more to Clara than she could express. Here was a man who understood what she was trying to do, who did not diminish her dreams or treat them as foolish fancy. "We should start by getting you comfortable with the tools," James said, shifting into a more practical tone. "Branding requires specific equipment, and you need to know how to use all of it safely. Come on, I will show you." They spent the rest of that day in the barn, with James explaining the different types of branding irons and how they were heated and applied. He showed her the stamps that would need to be forged to create her Star C brand, explaining how the metal had to be the right thickness to burn clearly without causing excessive damage to the hide. "The goal is a clean burn that scars permanently but does not torture the animal," James said. "You heat the iron until it is hot enough to destroy the hair follicles and outer layer of skin, but not so hot that it burns deep into the flesh. It takes practice to get the temperature and timing right." Clara listened intently, asking questions and taking mental notes. James was a patient teacher, never making her feel stupid for not knowing something, always willing to explain again if she did not understand the first time. Over the next week, they prepared for the actual branding. James rode into town and arranged for a blacksmith to forge the Star C iron, according to Clara's design. While they waited for it to be ready, he taught her other essential skills: how to rope a calf, how to wrestle a full-grown cow to the ground if necessary, how to read the behavior of cattle and predict when they might spook or charge. The work was exhausting. Clara had always been strong from farm labor, but this was different. Wrestling with animals that outweighed her by hundreds of pounds required not just strength, but leverage, timing, and an understanding of how cattle moved and thought. She fell more times than she could count, ending each day bruised and covered in dust, her muscles screaming in protest. But James never once suggested she give up. When she struggled, he showed her different techniques, finding approaches that worked with her smaller size and different build. When she succeeded, even in small ways, he acknowledged it with a nod or a quiet word of praise that made her determined to do even better the next time. They fell into a rhythm, working from dawn until dusk, breaking only for meals that they ate together on the porch or at the rough table in her kitchen. Clara found herself looking forward to those breaks, to the conversations that ranged from practical matters about ranching to more personal topics about their lives and experiences. She learned that James had grown up on a ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. His family had lost everything in the aftermath of the Civil War, their land seized for unpaid taxes, their remaining cattle scattered or stolen. His parents had died within a year of each other, broken by the loss of everything they had built. James had been 17 when he set out on his own, working his way north, learning everything he could about ranching, with the hope that someday he might have land of his own again. "But that dream seems further away every year," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Land is expensive, and what I earn working for others barely keeps me fed and clothed. I have started to wonder if I am chasing something impossible." "It is not impossible," Clara said firmly. "My father came here with nothing but determination and a willingness to work. He built this ranch from raw land, 1 fence post, and 1 head of cattle at a time. If he could do it, so can you." James looked at her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "You really believe that, do not you? You actually think people can make their dreams real through hard work alone?" "I have to believe it," Clara said. "Otherwise, what is the point of any of this?" "You are right," James said after a moment. "And maybe that is why I agreed to help you, because you reminded me that it is worth fighting for what you want, even when everyone else says it is impossible." The branding iron was ready 2 weeks after James had arrived at the ranch. Clara held it in her hands, feeling the weight of it, tracing the shape of her Star C with her fingers. This piece of metal represented her independence, her future, her refusal to accept the limitations others tried to place on her. "We will start with the calves," James said. "They are smaller, easier to handle while you are learning. Once you are confident with them, we can move on to the yearlings and eventually the full-grown cattle." Clara had purchased 10 young calves from a rancher in the next valley, carefully choosing animals that showed good health and strong bloodlines. They had been penned separately from her father's cattle, waiting for this moment. the first one fought like a demon when James roped it and pulled it toward the branding fire they had built in the center of the corral. Clara's job was to help hold the calf steady while James applied the brand. She gripped the animal's legs, using her weight to keep it down, feeling the incredible strength in its young body as it struggled against them. "Hold steady," James said, his voice calm despite the chaos. He pulled the iron from the fire, checked the color of the metal, then moved swiftly to press it against the calf's flank. The smell of burning hair filled the air, and the calf bawled in distress. Clara forced herself not to look away, not to flinch from this reality of ranching life. James held the iron in place for exactly 5 seconds, counting aloud, then pulled it away cleanly. The star C was burned clearly into the hide, the edges crisp and readable. "Good," James said, releasing his grip on the calf. "Let it go." Clara stepped back, and the calf scrambled to its feet, running to the far side of the corral. It would be sore for a few days, but the brand would heal, and it would carry her mark for the rest of its life. They branded 5 calves that first day, with Clara's role gradually shifting from holder to applicant. James guided her through each step, teaching her how to judge the temperature of the iron, how to apply it with firm, steady pressure, how to time the burn perfectly. Her hands shook the first time she held the hot iron, terrified she would hurt the animal unnecessarily or create a poor brand that would reflect badly on her competence. But James stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "You can do this," he said quietly. "I have watched you work for 2 weeks now. You have the strength and the skill. Trust yourself." Clara took a deep breath, then pressed the iron against the calf's hide. She counted to 5 in her head, keeping the pressure even, then pulled away. The brand was not quite as perfect as the ones James had done, but it was clear and readable, unmistakably her star C. "That is good work," James said, and the approval in his voice made her glow with pride. They finished the remaining calves over the next few days, and with each one, Clara grew more confident. Her technique improved, her timing became more precise, and her fear of making mistakes faded into a calm certainty that she knew what she was doing. On the last day, after the final calf had been branded and released, Clara stood by the corral fence and watched her small herd. 10 calves now bore her mark, her star C that no one could take away from her. They were officially, legally hers in a way that went beyond mere ownership. She had put her mark on them with her own hands, had done the work that men claimed women could not do. "How does it feel?" James asked, coming to stand beside her. "Like I finally have a place in this world," Clara said. "Like I am not just my father's daughter anymore, but my own person with my own future." James smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face into something warmer, more open. "You should be proud. You worked hard for this." Clara turned to look at him, really look at him, and realized with a start that she had come to depend on his presence over the past weeks. He had become more than just a hired hand teaching her a skill. He had become a friend, someone whose opinion mattered to her, whose company she enjoyed. "I could not have done it without you," she said. "You gave me a chance when no one else would." "You gave yourself a chance," James corrected. "I just provided some guidance. The determination, the courage to face down everyone who laughed at you, that was all you." They stood there in the fading light, and Clara felt something shift between them, an awareness that had been building gradually, but now seemed impossible to ignore. She found herself noticing details she had tried not to see before, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the strength in his hands, the gentle patience in his voice when he taught her something new. She was falling for him, she realized, with a mixture of excitement and fear. This cowboy who had drifted into her life by chance was becoming someone she could not imagine living without. But she had no idea if he felt the same way. James was kind to her, respectful, encouraging, but was that just his nature? Or was there something more beneath his quiet demeanor? The answer came a week later, in a way neither of them expected. Clara had ridden into town to register her brand officially, carrying the paperwork James had helped her prepare and the filing fees she had scraped together from her savings. She walked into the stockyard office with her shoulders back and her head high, daring anyone to laugh at her this time. The same clerk was behind the counter, and his face soured when he saw her. "You again," he said. "I told you to go home." "And I am telling you to file this brand registration," Clara said, sliding the papers across the counter. "Everything is in order. I have done the work, applied the brand, and paid the fee. You have no legal grounds to refuse me. The clerk picked up the papers with obvious reluctance, scanning them for any error he could use to reject her application. But James had been thorough, and every detail was correct. Who did the branding? The clerk asked suspiciously. Some man you hired? I did the branding myself, Clara said, under the instruction of an experienced cowhand, but I applied every mark with my own hands. That is a lie, said a voice from behind her. Clara turned to see her uncle, William Bennett, standing in the doorway. He was a big man, red-faced and bulky, with the kind of presence that made people step aside. No woman could do that work. She's trying to cheat the system, probably got some man to do it for her, and is claiming credit. I did the work, Clara repeated, her voice steady despite the anger rising in her chest. And I have a witness who will testify to that fact. What witness? Her uncle scoffed. Some drifter you paid to lie for you? Me, said another voice, and James stepped into the office. Clara had not even known he was in town, but there he was, his expression calm, but with steel beneath it. My name is James Cordell, and I have been working for Miss Bennett for the past month. I taught her how to brand cattle, and I watched her apply the Star C to 10 head of young stock with her own hands. She did good work, better than many men I have worked with over the years. William Bennett looked James up and down with contempt. And why should anyone believe a saddle tramp? Because I have references from every ranch I have worked in the past 10 years, James said evenly, including the Triple J in Wyoming, the Rocking H in Colorado, and the Lazy S in Texas. You can wire any of those outfits and ask about my character and my honesty. I have never lied to an employer, and I am not starting now. The clerk looked uncertain, glancing between William's red face and James's steady gaze. I will need to verify these references, he said slowly. Then verify them, James said. But you will find I am telling the truth. Miss Bennett earned her brand fair and square. William made a disgusted noise and stormed out of the office, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The clerk looked after him nervously, clearly uncomfortable with defying such a prominent rancher, but also aware that he had no legal justification for rejecting Clara's application if James's testimony held up. Come back in a week, the clerk said finally. I will have checked your witness's references by then. Outside, Clara grabbed James's arm, her heart racing. Thank you, she said. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did, James said. Your uncle was trying to bully you out of what you earned. I was not going to stand by and let that happen. They walked down the street together, and Clara found herself acutely aware of how close James was, how natural it felt to be at his side. They stopped outside the general store, where Clara needed to pick up supplies. Why did you really come to town today? She asked. I did not tell you I was coming. James looked uncomfortable for the first time since she had met him. Mrs. Henderson sent word that your uncle was asking questions about you, about who was working for you. I figured he might make trouble, so I thought I should be here. You came to protect me, Clara said softly. I came to make sure you got what you deserved, James corrected. But his eyes said something more, something that made Clara's heart beat faster. She wanted to say something, to tell him that he had come to mean more to her than just a hired hand or a friend, but the words stuck in her throat. This was not the time or the place, standing on a public street with people passing by. Come on, she said instead. Help me with the supplies and we can head back to the ranch. The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Clara kept replaying the scene in the office, the way James had stood up for her without hesitation, the strength in his voice when he testified to her work. He could have stayed silent, could have let her fight her own battles, but he had chosen to stand beside her. That night, after the horses were tended and the supplies stored away, Clara found James sitting on the porch of the bunkhouse, looking out at the stars. She had meant to go to her own house, to give him his privacy, but her feet carried her to him instead. Can I sit with you? She asked. Of course, James said, moving over to make room on the bench. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the cattle lowing in the distance, an owl hooting from the barn, the wind rustling through the grass. I have been thinking, Clara said finally, about what happens after my brand is registered. James glanced at her but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. I will need to hire more help if I want to expand the herd, Clara continued. Someone who knows cattle, who is honest and hardworking, who I can trust. I am sure you will find good people, James said, his voice carefully neutral. I already have, Clara said, turning to face him. James, I want you to stay, not just for another month or another season, but permanently. I know it is not the same as having your own land, but I could make you a partner instead of just a hired hand. We could build this ranch together. James went very still. Clara, what are you saying? I am saying that I trust you, Clara said. I am saying that these past weeks working with you have been the happiest I have had since my father died. I am saying that I do not want you to drift away to the next ranch and the next town. I want you here. You barely know me, James said, but there was hope in his voice, fragile and uncertain. I know enough, Clara said. I know you are honest and kind. I know you work hard and you treat animals and people with respect. I know you saw me as capable when everyone else saw me as foolish. That tells me everything I need to know. James reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, warm and strong against hers. I have been trying not to feel this way, he admitted. You are my employer, and it would not be proper to have these thoughts about you. But Clara, every day I have spent here, I have fallen a little more in love with you. With your courage, your determination, the way you refuse to let anyone dim your light. Clara's breath caught. You love me? I do, James said simply. I know it is too soon. I know you might not feel the same way, but I cannot lie about it anymore. I love you, and the thought of leaving this ranch, of leaving you, feels like tearing out part of my soul. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. I love you too, she whispered. I think I started falling for you the day you agreed to teach me, the day you took me seriously when no one else would. James lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then, I am not going anywhere, he said. If you will have me, I will stay for as long as you want me. Forever, Clara said. I want you forever. James pulled her close, and she went willingly, resting her head against his shoulder and feeling safe and happy in a way she had not known was possible. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other under the stars, making quiet plans for a future they would build together. The week passed slowly as they waited for word from the stockyard office. Clara and James continued working the ranch, but now there was a new dimension to their relationship. They stole moments together whenever they could, a kiss in the barn when the work was done, holding hands as they walked to check on the cattle, sitting close at meals and letting their shoulders touch. It felt right in a way that Clara had never experienced before. She had wondered sometimes if she would ever find someone who could accept her independence, who would not try to change her or diminish her dreams. In James, she had found a partner who celebrated her strength instead of fearing it. When the message finally came from town that her brand registration had been approved, they rode in together to collect the official paperwork. The clerk handed it over with obvious reluctance, informing them stiffly that James's references had checked out, and that everything was in order. Clara walked out of that office with her head high, holding the document that proved her Star C was now legally registered to her name. She was officially a cattle rancher in her own right, a woman with her own mark in a world that had tried to tell her such things were impossible. We should celebrate, James said as they prepared to ride home. How? Clara asked. James smiled, that warm expression that made her heart flutter. Well, we could stop by the church and talk to the Reverend. Clara's eyes widened. James Cordell, are you proposing to me? I suppose I am, James said, though I am doing a poor job of it. What I mean to say is, Clara Bennett, you are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met. I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life building dreams with you. Will you marry me? Clara felt happiness bloom in her chest like a sunrise. Yes, she said. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Prescott, with Mrs. Henderson and a few other friendly townsfolk in attendance. Clara wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and James wore his best shirt and a new vest purchased especially for the occasion. They spoke their vows with steady voices, promising to love and honor each other, to face whatever challenges came their way together. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her with a tenderness that made Clara's knees weak. This was her partner, her love, the man who had seen her potential and helped her realize it. Together, they would build something extraordinary. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and growing prosperity. They expanded the herd gradually, purchasing cattle whenever they had saved enough money, each animal carefully selected for quality and marked with Clara's star C. James proved to be not just a skilled cowhand, but also a shrewd judge of livestock and markets. His advice helped them make smart decisions about when to buy and sell, how to manage their grazing land, how to prepare for the harsh Montana winters. Clara continued to do much of the branding herself, taking pride in the work even as the herd grew larger and more time-consuming to manage. Word spread through the ranching community about the woman who branded her own cattle, and reactions were mixed. Some ranchers remained dismissive or openly hostile, but others, particularly younger men and a handful of other women trying to make their way in the industry, began to seek her advice. One such woman was Sarah Jennings, a widow in her 30s who had inherited a small ranch from her husband. She arrived at Clara's door one spring morning in 1886, nervous and uncertain, asking if the stories she had heard were true. "Did you really learn to brand your own cattle?" Sarah asked. "Did you really register your own mark?" Clara showed her the Star C brand on several head of cattle, explained how she had learned the skill, and introduced her to James, who confirmed every word. "Could you teach me?" Sarah asked hopefully. "I have a small herd, but my husband's brand reverted to his brother, and he wants to buy me out for a fraction of what the property is worth. If I could register my own brand, I could keep the ranch and support myself." Clara looked at James, who nodded with a slight smile. "We can teach you," Clara said. "It will be hard work, but if you are willing to learn, we are willing to teach." Over the following months, Sarah became a regular presence at the ranch, learning the same skills James had taught Clara. She was a quick study, and by summer's end, she had registered her own brand, the Double J, and was managing her ranch independently. The gratitude in her eyes when she thanked Clara made all the effort worthwhile. "You gave me my life back," Sarah said. "You showed me I did not have to accept what men told me I was capable of." Clara hugged her, feeling the significance of that moment. She had set out to prove she could brand her own cattle, to claim her own place in the ranching world. But, in doing so, she had opened doors for other women, shown them that independence was possible if they were willing to fight for it. As autumn of 1886 approached, Clara began to feel different. Her energy flagged more easily, her stomach grew sensitive to certain foods, and she experienced waves of nausea in the mornings. At first, she attributed it to overwork or perhaps a mild illness, but when her monthly courses failed to arrive, understanding dawned with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was pregnant. Clara told James on a cool evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then broke into the widest smile she had ever seen on his face. "We are going to have a baby?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "We are," Clara confirmed. "In the spring, I think, March or April." James pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You have given me everything I never dared to dream of," he whispered against her hair. "A home, a purpose, and now a family. I love you so much." The pregnancy was challenging. Clara continued to work as long as she safely could, refusing to treat her condition like an illness, but eventually, she had to accept that there were things she simply could not do anymore. James took over the more strenuous tasks without complaint, and they hired a young man named Peter to help with the daily labor. Clara fretted about not pulling her weight, but James reassured her constantly. "You are growing our child," he reminded her. "That is work enough." Their son was born on a stormy night in April 1887, arriving with lusty cries that filled the small house with noise. Mrs. Henderson served as midwife, guiding Clara through the difficult hours of labor with calm competence. When it was over and the baby was cleaned and swaddled, she placed him in Clara's arms with a smile. "He is perfect," Mrs. Henderson said, "and he has his mother's determination already, judging by how hard he fought to get here." James sat beside Clara on the bed, staring at his son with an expression of awe. "What should we call him?" he asked softly. "Thomas," Clara said. "After my father, Thomas James Cordell." "That is a good strong name," James said, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. Thomas immediately gripped his father's finger, holding on with surprising strength. James laughed, a sound of pure joy. He already knows how to hold on to what is important. The early months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Thomas was a healthy, energetic baby who demanded constant attention. Clara had thought ranching was hard work, but nothing had prepared her for the relentless needs of an infant. Yet she found reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. And James was a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor with Thomas when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, singing soft lullabies in his deep voice. The ranch continued to prosper. By the summer of 1888, they had nearly 100 head of cattle, all bearing the Star C brand. They had also expanded their property, purchasing an adjacent 40 acres, when the previous owner retired and moved to live with his daughter in California. The additional grazing land allowed them to increase their herd further, and their reputation for quality livestock grew. Clara's status in the ranching community had shifted over the years. While some men still refused to take her seriously, many others had come to respect her knowledge and capability. She was invited to sit on the local Cattlemen's Association, a rare honor for a woman, and her opinions on herd management and market conditions were sought after. She never forgot the laughter that had greeted her first attempt to register her brand, but she no longer let it sting. Instead, she used it as fuel, as a reminder of how far she had come. Every time she looked at her cattle bearing the Star C, every time she taught another woman how to claim her independence through ranching, she felt a deep satisfaction that no amount of mockery could diminish. Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed his parents everywhere, trying to help with the ranch work in his clumsy, enthusiastic way. He loved the cattle and showed no fear of them, even the large bulls that made some adults nervous. James began teaching him about animals as soon as he could walk, instilling in him the same respect for livestock that he had learned from his own father. In 1889, Clara became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. She continued to work almost until the end, finally relenting only in the last few weeks when her size made movement difficult. Their daughter was born in February 1890, during a brief warm spell between winter storms. She was smaller than Thomas had been, more delicate, but healthy and alert. Clara had chosen the name Catherine after James's mother, a gesture that brought tears to her husband's eyes. "You honor me and my family," he said, holding Catherine with a gentleness that belied his rough cowboy exterior. "My mother would have loved you. She would have been so proud to know her granddaughter carried her name." Life settled into a pleasant rhythm over the following years. The ranch continued to grow, becoming one of the more prosperous operations in the region. Thomas and Catherine grew up learning ranching, alongside reading and arithmetic, understanding from an early age that success came from hard work and smart decisions. Clara made sure Catherine received the same instruction as Thomas. She would not raise her daughter to believe that there were limits on what she could achieve because of her gender. Catherine learned to ride, to rope, to handle cattle, and yes, eventually, to brand. When she was 12, she helped her mother apply the Star C to her first calf, her small hands steady as she held the iron just as she had been taught. Thomas, for his part, grew into a strong young man who shared his father's quiet competence and his mother's determination. He respected women in a way that was still unusual for the time, having grown up watching his mother command respect in a male-dominated world. The years brought changes beyond their family. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, bringing new opportunities and challenges to the territory. The railroad expanded, making it easier to transport cattle to market, but also bringing more settlers and more competition for land and resources. The open range began to disappear as more ranchers fenced their properties, a development that changed the nature of ranching fundamentally. Through it all, Clara and James adapted and thrived. They modernized their operation when it made sense to do so, but they also held on to the traditional skills and values that had built their success. They remained partners in every sense, making decisions together, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating victories as a team. In 1895, Clara stood in the same stockyard office where she had been laughed at 11 years earlier. The original clerk had retired, replaced by a younger man who treated her with professional courtesy. She was there to register an additional brand variation, an expansion of the Star C that would mark a new breeding program they were starting. As she completed the paperwork, a young woman entered the office, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. She reminded Clara powerfully of herself at 22, facing down the mockery of men who thought her dreams were foolish. The woman approached the counter hesitantly. "I would like to register a brand," she said, "for my cattle." The clerk nodded politely. "Of course, miss. Do you have your design and paperwork ready?" Clara watched as the young woman laid out her materials, explaining her ranch and her plans with growing confidence when she realized she was not going to be ridiculed. When the transaction was complete, Clara followed her outside. "Excuse me," Clara said. "I am Clara Cordell. I own the Star Sea Ranch east of town." The young woman's eyes widened. "I know who you are. You are the reason I had the courage to do this. My mother told me about you, about how you learned to brand your own cattle when everyone said women could not do such work. You showed that it was possible." Clara felt a swell of emotion. This was her legacy, she realized. Not just the ranch or the cattle, or even her children, though all of those mattered. Her true legacy was proving that women could carve out their own place in this world, that determination and skill mattered more than gender. "What is your name?" Clara asked. "Emma Patterson," the young woman said. "I inherited 40 acres from my grandmother, and I am going to make it into a real ranch." "I am sure you will," Clara said warmly. "And if you ever need advice or help, you come find me. We women need to support each other." Emma's grateful smile reminded Clara of the way she had looked at James that first day when he agreed to teach her. It was the expression of someone who had been given hope when they desperately needed it. That evening, Clara told James about the encounter as they sat on their porch, a habit they had maintained throughout their marriage. Thomas and Catherine were inside doing their evening chores, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, as it had been in those early days when they were building their life together. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked. "Taking the hard path, fighting all those battles?" "Never," Clara said without hesitation. "Every struggle was worth it. This ranch, our family, the women we have helped along the way, all of it came from refusing to accept what others said I could or could not do." "You have built something remarkable," James said, taking her hand. "Not just a ranch, but a legacy. There are women all over Montana now who are branding their own cattle because you showed them it could be done." "We built it together," Clara corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you. You gave me the skills, yes, but more than that, you gave me respect when no one else would. You believed in me. I fell in love with you the moment you looked me in the eye and told me you wanted to learn," James admitted. "Most people, men or women, would have given up after being laughed at like you were. But you just got more determined. How could I not love someone with that much fire in their soul?" Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling content in a way that never got old. They had been married for over a decade now, had faced drought and harsh winters, difficult births and cattle diseases, financial stress and family crises. Through it all, their love had only grown stronger, rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. "I love you, James Cordell," she said softly. "Thank you for teaching me to brand my cattle. Thank you for respecting my mark. Thank you for building this life with me." "Thank you for letting me," James replied, kissing the top of her head. "Thank you for giving a drifting cowboy a home and a purpose and a love greater than anything he could have imagined." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative conversations, their first kiss, their promises to each other. The cattle bearing the Star Sea grazed peacefully in the distance, living proof of what Clara had achieved. The sounds of their children's laughter drifted from the house, the next generation who would carry forward the values and the legacy their parents had built. As the years continued to pass, the Star Sea Ranch became legendary in Montana ranching circles. What had started as 30 head of cattle inherited from Clara's father had grown into a herd of over 300, grazing on 240 acres of prime rangeland. Thomas and Catherine both showed an aptitude for ranching, though they had different interests within it. Thomas was fascinated by breeding programs and bloodlines, constantly studying how to improve their herd's quality. Catherine had her mother's head for business, and her father's eye for reading market conditions, skills that proved invaluable as the cattle industry became increasingly complex. In 1898, when Thomas was 11 and Catherine 8, Clara and James decided it was time to give their children a more formal role in the ranch operations. They gathered the family together one evening and announced that they were going to start teaching the children how to manage different aspects of the business. "This ranch will be yours someday," Clara told them seriously. "Not because you are our children and entitled to it, but because you will earn it through hard work and learning. Your father and I built this place from almost nothing, and we want you to understand everything that goes into keeping it successful." Thomas sat up straighter, clearly excited by the responsibility. Catherine looked thoughtful, already considering what she wanted to learn first. "I want to understand the breeding program," Thomas said immediately. "How we decide which bulls to use, how we track bloodlines, all of it." "And I want to learn about the business side," Catherine said. "How we price our cattle, where we sell them, how we manage the finances." Clara and James exchanged a pleased look. Their children were already thinking strategically, identifying their strengths and interests. Over the following years, the children became genuine contributors to the ranch's success. Thomas's breeding program improved the quality of their herd significantly, making Star C cattle sought after at market. Catherine developed relationships with buyers that ensured they always got fair prices for their livestock. They worked alongside their parents, learning not just the skills, but also the values that had built the ranch: honesty, hard work, respect for animals and people alike. The community around them continued to evolve. More women entered ranching, though it remained predominantly a male industry. Clara became a mentor to many of them, offering advice and support freely. She never forgot how important James's willingness to teach her had been, and she tried to pay that gift forward whenever she could. Sarah Jennings, the first woman Clara had taught to brand, became a particular friend. Her Double J ranch prospered, and she eventually remarried to a cowhand who respected her independence and worked alongside her as a partner. The two women often sat together at Cattlemen's Association meetings, a quiet reminder that the ranching world was changing, however slowly. In 1902, a journalist from a Denver newspaper arrived at the Star C Ranch, wanting to write a story about Clara for a series on pioneering women of the West. Clara was reluctant at first, uncomfortable with the attention, but James encouraged her to do it. "Your story matters," he said. "There are women all over the country who need to know that they can build their own futures, that they do not have to accept the limitations society tries to place on them. Let them know what you have achieved." So Clara agreed, and she spent an afternoon talking to the journalist, a young woman named Margaret, who listened with rapt attention as Clara described learning to brand, registering her Star C mark, and building the ranch into what it had become. James and the children were interviewed as well, all of them talking about the importance of partnership and respect in creating a successful ranching operation. When the article was published, it caused quite a stir. Some readers dismissed it as exaggeration or propaganda, refusing to believe a woman could do the work described, but many others, particularly women, found inspiration in Clara's story. Letters began arriving at the ranch from across the West, from women who were attempting their own ventures in ranching or other male-dominated industries, thanking Clara for showing them it was possible. One letter in particular moved Clara deeply. It was from a widow in Wyoming who had been about to sell her late husband's ranch to a neighbor because she believed she could not manage it alone. Reading about Clara had changed her mind, and she was now learning to run the operation herself. "You gave me courage," the woman wrote. "You showed me that I was capable of more than I believed. Thank you for refusing to accept what others said you could not do. It gave me permission to do the same." Clara showed the letter to James that evening, tears in her eyes. "I never imagined," she said softly, "when I just wanted to brand my own cattle, I never imagined it would mean something to anyone beyond myself." "You underestimate the power of example," James said, pulling her close. "People need to see that things they have been told are impossible can actually be done. You provided that example, and now others are following the path you cleared." As Thomas and Catherine grew into young adults, they each faced their own challenges in continuing their parents' legacy. Thomas fell in love with a young woman named Rebecca, who had moved to Montana from Ohio with her family. Rebecca had no ranching experience, but she was eager to learn, and Clara took her under her wing, much as James had once taught Clara. By the time Thomas and Rebecca married in 1904, Rebecca could rope and ride as well as anyone, and she had proven herself a valuable addition to the ranch operations. Catherine's path was more complicated. She fell in love with a banker's son from Prescott, a young man named Daniel who was intelligent and kind, but had no interest in ranching. For a while, it seemed like Catherine might choose a different life, one in town with a husband whose work was far removed from cattle and branding. Clara tried not to interfere, but she worried about her daughter giving up the ranch skills and knowledge she had worked so hard to acquire. Finally, one evening, she and Catherine had a long, honest conversation about it. "Do you love him?" Clara asked directly. "I do," Catherine said. "But I also love the ranch. I love this life, this work. I do not know how to choose between them." "Have you talked to Daniel about it?" Clara asked. "About what you want for your future?" "He thinks I will be happy in town, being a banker's wife," Catherine admitted. "He does not understand that this place is part of who I am." Clara took her daughter's hand. "Then you need to make him understand," she said gently. "I was fortunate that your father respected my dreams from the beginning. But sometimes men need to be educated about what women want and need. If Daniel truly loves you, he will listen and try to find a compromise. If he cannot do that, then maybe he is not the right man for you, no matter how much you care for him." Catherine took that advice to heart. She had a serious conversation with Daniel, explaining that she needed to remain involved with the ranch, that it was not just a job, but a fundamental part of her identity. To his credit, Daniel listened and thought carefully about what she said. His solution surprised everyone. He proposed that they build a house halfway between the ranch and town, close enough for him to commute to his work at the bank, but also close enough for Catherine to remain actively involved in ranch management. He also promised to learn about ranching himself, not to take over, but to understand the world that was so important to his future wife. They married in 1906, and Daniel proved true to his word. He learned to ride and to handle cattle, though he never pretended to have the natural aptitude that Catherine did. More importantly, he supported her continued work with the ranch, never asking her to choose between him and the life she had built. Clara grew to love him as a son, respecting him for his willingness to meet Catherine where she was, rather than demanding she change to fit his expectations. By 1910, Clara and James were in their 50s, still active and healthy, but beginning to think about the next phase of their lives. The ranch was running smoothly, with Thomas and Rebecca handling much of the daily operation, and Catherine managing the business side, even while living off-site. They had 2 grandchildren by then, Thomas and Rebecca's sons, Daniel and Michael, who were already learning to ride and showing signs of becoming the next generation of Star Sea ranchers. One afternoon, as Clara and James worked on repairing a section of fence together, they talked about what they had built and what came next. "I never thought I would live to see grandchildren running around this place," James admitted. "When I was young, after my family lost everything, I figured I would just drift from job to job until I got too old to work, then fade away somewhere. You gave me so much more than I ever dreamed possible." "We gave each other more than we dreamed," Clara corrected. "I wanted to brand my own cattle, to prove I could do it. You helped me achieve that, and then respected my mark when no one else would. But what we built together went so far beyond that initial goal. We created a life, a family, a legacy that will continue long after we are gone." James set down his hammer and pulled Clara into an embrace, heedless of the dirt and sweat from their work. "I love you," he said simply. "Just as much today as the day I married you. More, actually, because now I know every facet of who you are, and it is all remarkable." Clara kissed him, feeling the same rush of love and desire she had felt all those years ago when they were newlyweds. Their passion for each other had not dimmed with time and familiarity. If anything, it had deepened, rooted now not just in attraction, but in profound respect and understanding. They made love that night with the tenderness and intensity of long partnership, celebrating the life they had built together and the love that had sustained them through every challenge. Afterwards, lying in each other's arms in the bed they had shared for over 20 years, Clara reflected on how blessed she was. "Do you remember the day we met?" she asked James softly. "When you rode past me on the street after I had been laughed out of the stockyard office?" "I remember thinking you looked like you were ready to burn the town down," James said with a chuckle. "You had fire in your eyes, determination in every line of your body, and I remember thinking I wanted to know what had put that expression on your face. And then Mrs. Henderson introduced us," Clara continued, "and you agreed to teach me when you had no reason to help a strange woman with an impossible dream." "It was not impossible," James said. "Difficult, yes. Unusual, certainly, but not impossible. I saw that in you from the start. You had the will to learn, the courage to face adversity. All I did was provide some technical instruction." "You did so much more than that," Clara insisted. "You gave me respect when I was starving for it. You treated me like an equal when the rest of the world wanted to diminish me. You saw me, really saw me, and that made all the difference." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, and Clara felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. This life, this love, this legacy, it had all grown from a simple choice. A cowboy deciding to help a woman learn to brand her own cattle, and both of them choosing to respect each other as equals. The years continued to pass peacefully. Thomas and Rebecca had a daughter in 1912, whom they named Clara after her grandmother. Young Clara showed early signs of having inherited her namesake's determination and fire, refusing to be left behind when her older brothers went out to work with the cattle. Catherine and Daniel had a son in 1913, a boy they named James, ensuring that both Clara and James would see their names carried into the next generation. In 1915, as the world beyond Montana descended into war, Clara and James celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party that drew friends and neighbors from across the county. Sarah Jennings and her family came, along with Emma Patterson, who now ran a successful ranch of her own, and dozens of others whose lives had been touched by Clara and James's example. Speeches were made praising their partnership and their contributions to the ranching community. But the moment Clara treasured most came later, when the party had wound down and she stood with James looking out over their land as the sun set. 30 years, James said wonderingly. It seems like a lifetime, and yet also like it just began. We have had a good life, Clara said. Better than good. We have had an extraordinary life. We have indeed, James agreed. And you know what the best part is? It is not over yet. We still have years ahead of us, more memories to make, more grandchildren to spoil, more cattle to brand with your star C. Clara laughed, leaning into his embrace. I still love seeing that mark on the cattle, she admitted. Even after all these years, it gives me a thrill to see my brand on the herd. As it should, James said. You earned that mark. You fought for it, learned for it, proved yourself worthy of it. Every time I see the star C on an animal, I think about the woman who refused to accept no for an answer, who turned mockery into motivation. I am proud to be your husband, Clara. I have been proud every day for 30 years. They stood together as darkness fell, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had raised, the legacy they would leave behind. The cattle bearing the star C grazed peacefully in the distance, and Clara thought about all the women who now ran their own ranches, branded their own cattle, because she had shown it could be done. She had wanted to brand her own cattle, and a cowboy had taught her and respected her mark. From that simple beginning had grown everything that mattered most in her life: love, partnership, family, purpose, and the satisfaction of knowing she had made a difference in the world. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing about the path her life had taken. Every struggle had been worth it. Every moment of doubt had been overcome. And through it all, James had been beside her, her partner in every sense of the word, the man who had helped her become everything she was capable of being. The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding vows, the birth of their children, and countless other moments that had woven together into the tapestry of their shared life. And beneath those stars, Clara Bennett Cordell knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, with exactly the person she was meant to love. The Star C Ranch continued to thrive through the 1920s and beyond. Thomas took over as primary manager when James and Clara gradually stepped back from daily operations, though they remained active advisors and loving grandparents. Rebecca proved to be not just Thomas's wife, but also a ranching partner in her own right, much as Clara had been for James. The third generation, the grandchildren, grew up learning that gender did not determine capability, that respect and hard work were what mattered, and that family meant supporting each other's dreams. Catherine's involvement with the ranch evolved as her children grew. She took on more responsibility for the business operations, expanding Star C's markets and reputation throughout Montana and into neighboring states. Her financial acumen ensured the ranch remained profitable even during difficult economic times, and her son James showed signs of inheriting that same talent for business, combined with his grandfather's skill with cattle. In 1925, Clara stood once again in the stockyard office in Prescott, this time accompanied by her granddaughter, young Clara, who was now 13 years old and wanted to register her own brand variation to mark cattle she was raising as part of a 4-H project. The current clerk, a man young enough to be Clara's grandson, processed the paperwork without comment or surprise. A girl wanting to register a brand was no longer unusual, no longer something to mock. As they walked out of the office, young Clara looked up at her grandmother with admiration. "Mama told me you were the first woman around here to brand your own cattle," she said. "Is that true?" "I was the first in this county," Clara confirmed, "though I am sure there were women in other places who did it before me. I was just the first one here stubborn enough not to give up when people laughed at me." "Were you scared?" young Clara asked. Clara considered the question honestly. "Sometimes," she admitted. "It is frightening to try something everyone tells you is impossible. But I was more scared of not trying, of letting other people's limitations become my own. And I was very fortunate that your grandfather was willing to teach me and support me when I needed it most." "I want to be like you," young Clara said earnestly, strong and brave and not afraid of what people think. Clara hugged her granddaughter, feeling the circle of generations completing itself. "You already are like me," she said. "You have the same fire, the same determination. The world is going to be different for you than it was for me. Women have more opportunities now, more respect. But there will still be challenges, still be people who try to limit you. When that happens, remember that you come from a long line of strong women and men who believed in partnership and respect. And know that I will always be proud of you, no matter what path you choose." James passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1932, at the age of 70. Clara held his hand through his final hours, talking to him about their life together, reminding him of all the joy they had shared. His last words to her were simple. "I love you. Thank you for every day." The grief of losing him was profound. James had been her partner for over 40 years, her best friend, her greatest supporter. The ranch felt empty without his steady presence, without his quiet wisdom and gentle humor. But Clara took comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together, in the knowledge that their love had been real and deep and enduring. She continued to live on the ranch, still active and engaged despite her age. She worked in her garden, advised on ranch decisions, played with her great-grandchildren who were starting to arrive as Thomas and Rebecca's children began families of their own. She told stories about their grandfather, ensuring that the next generations understood the kind of man he had been, the role he had played in building everything they now enjoyed. Clara lived to see the ranch celebrate its 50th anniversary in 1934, a milestone that brought together family and friends from across the state. At 82 years old, she was still sharp-minded and strong-willed, still the woman who had refused to accept no for an answer all those years ago. On a warm summer evening during the anniversary celebration, Clara stood before the assembled crowd and spoke about what the ranch meant to her, what it represented beyond just land and cattle. 50 years ago, I was laughed at for wanting to brand my own cattle, she began, her voice still clear and strong. Men told me it was impossible, that I should give up my foolish dreams. But there was one man who did not laugh, one cowboy who agreed to teach me, who treated me with respect, who saw me as capable when others saw me as foolish. That man became my husband, my partner, and the love of my life. Together, we built this ranch, raised our children, and proved that partnership and mutual respect can create something extraordinary. She gestured to the cattle grazing in the distance, many of them still bearing the Star C brand. That mark represents more than ownership of livestock. It represents the right of every person, regardless of gender, to pursue their dreams and build their own future. It represents the power of finding a partner who respects you rather than one who tries to control or limit you. And it represents the importance of passing on values, not just property, to the next generation. Clara looked at her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered before her. All of you are inheritors of this legacy, not just the land and the cattle, but the values that built them. Work hard, treat people and animals with respect, support each other's dreams rather than limiting them. Find partners who see you as equals, who celebrate your strengths rather than fearing them. And never ever let anyone tell you something is impossible just because it has not been done before. The crowd erupted in applause, and Clara felt a deep satisfaction. She had lived a good life, a meaningful life. She had made a difference, not just for herself, but for countless others who had followed the path she had cleared. Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1936, just shy of her 84th birthday. The entire county mourned her loss, recognizing the passing of a true pioneer who had changed the ranching community forever. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including dozens of women, ranchers who credited Clara with inspiring them to claim their own independence. She was buried next to James on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they had built together. The headstone was simple but powerful. Clara Bennett Cordell, 1852 to 1936. She branded her own cattle and lived on her own terms. The Star C Ranch continued for generations, each one adding to the legacy while honoring the values Clara and James had established. The story of the woman who was laughed at for wanting to brand her own cattle, and the cowboy who taught her and respected her mark, became part of Montana ranching lore, told and retold as an example of courage, partnership, and the power of refusing to accept imposed limitations. And on the cattle that still grazed those same rolling hills, the Star C brand remained clear and proud, a permanent mark that testified to one woman's determination and one man's respect, and the extraordinary life they had built together. The ranch house, expanded and modernized over the decades but still recognizable as the structure James and Clara had called home, stood as a testament to their love story. In the main room, a frame held the original brand registration document, the paperwork Clara had fought so hard to file, now yellowed with age but still legible, still proof that she had done what everyone said was impossible. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the Montana hills, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echoes of their voices on the porch, talking about cattle and dreams and the beautiful life they had created together, one branded calf at a time. Their love story was not one of grand romantic gestures or dramatic declarations. It was quieter than that, built on daily acts of respect and partnership, on teaching and learning, on standing beside each other when the world tried to push them apart. It was a love story forged in the hard work of ranching, in the satisfaction of achieving goals together, in the simple joy of building a life with someone who saw you truly and loved you completely. And that perhaps was the most romantic story of all. Two people who found each other in an unlikely moment, who chose to build something together rather than apart, who respected each other enough to let both partners shine, and who created a legacy that would endure for generations, branded forever with the mark they had made together. The Star C was more than just a brand. It was a symbol of possibility, of partnership, of refusing to accept limits, and of the transformative power of respect and love. Clara had wanted to brand her own cattle, and in doing so, she had branded her mark on history, on the community, and on everyone who heard her story and found in it the courage to pursue their own impossible dreams. And through it all, from that first day when James agreed to teach her to the final evening of her life, when she breathed her last, surrounded by the family they had created, one truth remained constant. She had been loved by a man who respected her mark, and she had loved him in return with equal measure. That was the foundation of everything, the heart of the legacy, the reason the Star C endured. Their story ended not with tragedy or loss, but with fulfillment and continuation. The ranch they built together thrived. The children they raised carried forward their values. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren who bore their names lived lives shaped by the example Clara and James had set. The women who followed in Clara's footsteps owed their independence in part to her courage. It was a story of triumph, of love prevailing, of dreams achieved through partnership and determination. It was the story of the American West at its best, a place where courage and hard work could overcome prejudice and limitation, where two people could build something from almost nothing, where love and respect could create a legacy that lasted long beyond one lifetime. The Star C Ranch stood as living proof that Clara Bennett had been right to insist on branding her own cattle, that James Cordell had been right to teach her and respect her mark, and that together they had created something far more valuable than just a successful ranching operation. They had created a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of Montana's golden hills and endless skies, a story that would be told and retold whenever people gathered to talk about what it meant to build a life worth living. And in the end, that was the greatest brand of all, not the Star C burned into cattle hides, but the mark Clara and James left on the world, a permanent testimony to the power of love, respect, and partnership. That mark would never fade, never be altered, never be forgotten. It was branded forever on the hearts and minds of everyone who knew their story, A reminder that the impossible was only impossible until someone brave enough came along to prove otherwise. Their story was complete, their legacy secure, their love eternal. The cattle bearing the star sea grazed on, generation after generation, each one carrying the mark of the woman who refused to be limited, and the man who loved her enough to help her fly. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever comes after this life, Clara and James were together still, watching over the ranch they built, smiling at the family they created, forever united in the love that had defined their lives and shaped their legacy. It was a happy ending, hard-earned and well-deserved, the kind of ending that only comes from a lifetime of love, work, and unwavering commitment to each other, and to the values that mattered most. The star sea would endure, and with it, the memory of a love story that proved true partnership could overcome any obstacle, achieve any dream, and create a legacy that would last forever.